I feel that contrary to belief, I'm not actually a black-pilled person. I'm not a doomer. I have a lot of hope in this world. And I have a lot of hope in individuals and communities and the change that they can enact and the change that they can bring to society. But in this video, I specifically wanted to talk about the future of conflict throughout the world, but mostly in the West. If you're like me, or majority of you out there, you've lived your entire life through a period of background war. Although it's not really affected most people's lives individually, it has always been kind of in the backdrop of our society. While everyone still goes through their graduations, marriages, childbirths, the important parts of their lives, starting their careers, for over 20 years, the West has been involved in various wars throughout the world. And it's always felt like a distant thing in our culture. It's always felt like a distant thing even in the media. If you were alive in the 2000s, you'll remember that it was just flashes of war on the news and then switching to celebrity news, pop culture. It was always in the background. It didn't really seem that important until some people died. And even in the beginning of the war, I remember in the media they would show the names of people who were lost overseas. But as the years went on, that went away. As the years went on, any reason of why we were fighting was lost in the conversation. I think America found a kind of hopelessness in the situation. The fact is that we were there. The fact is that we were entrenched in different wars and different fronts, that we all knew people that were over there. And we all had family members that were over there. And in the height of the conflict, it wasn't rare to know somebody who was affected personally by the war. As the numbers of injuries went up, as the numbers of deaths went up. But as the years went on, it didn't really seem to matter anymore. The wars and the impacts of the wars, what happened to the soldiers, what happened to the civilians, really didn't seem to matter unless it was involved in some kind of political discussion. If it revolved around getting a bill passed, or revolved around election day, these things would come up. Vets would be trotted out in the same way that when people are trying to court the Appalachian vote, they'd pull up coal miners. Only during special times do these people actually matter. I think as much as the government, as much as officials and people who are trying to push their own side's political interest, during those off times, the majority of those times, the struggle, the pain, and the reality of living the nightmare of the effects of the wars and hostilities that we've been in throughout generations at this point really didn't matter, and really don't matter. Because I think what we've seen over the past couple decades is the cheapening of life. Certainly the cheapening of foreign lives. I mean, during the Iraq War, hundreds of thousands, millions of civilians lost their lives in the conflict. And it doesn't really seem to matter when it comes to looking back and speaking of the justification. It's still an us and them thing. The value of a foreign life was nothing. It really didn't seem to have any value at all. It wasn't even worth talking about in the conversation. But on top of that, just reducing the casualties on the US side to numbers and no longer showing the names of people who died in the war. No longer showing the funerals, no longer showing the transports filled with flag-draped coffins as it came back to the States. Loss of life meant nothing anymore. We're just numbers. And I think that we saw that during the great sickness of 2019, 2020. It wasn't just lives that meant nothing anymore, it was autonomy. And now we're in a new age of war. Now we're in a new age of conflict, and it's closer to home. The old rivalries between East and West are coming back, and conflict is opening up in different parts of the world, really setting the stage for greater conflict in the near future. I feel like in my lifetime, in our lifetimes, it's really nothing but the expansion of the military-industrial complex and the cheapening of life to basically nothing. So do I think that it's going to get better? I don't think that it can get better. Because when life has no value, but there's a lot of value on war, then people just become grist for the wheel of profit, grist for the wheel of progress. And that's one of the reasons I find the idea of pushing progress to be so ludicrous. Because progress, when sponsored by the military-industrial complex, is the only direction that we're being given. Then we can really know for certainty that peace in our lifetime just isn't on the table. It's not a goal. The new aristocracy, the technocracy, the military-industrial complex, our higher political class They don't care about lives. They'll keep throwing us at the war. They'll keep throwing us at endless wars as long as there's a profit to be made off of it, because there's no ideological reason for us to be in these things anymore. So as we look at the conflict in Ukraine drag on and on and on, and more money is printed and sent over there, at the same time we're going through a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis, an epidemic of loneliness. It really does show us that the great eye of virtue, the great eye of focus, is no longer on our people. It's on people on the other side of the world who've never had any interest in us, and we'd never had any interest in them. So we have to think, why are we so interested in being in this conflict? And we can say that Russia is our enemy. We can say that to damage our enemy is a benefit to us. And I think that that might have existed in a time where companies of troops can ride down your streets and go door to door, plundering and pillaging and doing damage to your society. But in today's modern landscape, I don't think we can see any other purpose of conflict other than securing trade, other than securing profit, other than securing rights to certain interests. Because ideologically, I don't see a difference between me and Russians. Because ideologically, I can't find a difference between us and our enemy. And I think I've traveled enough to know that people from places that I'm supposed to hate usually are just like me. They're usually just like everyone that I grew up with. So we focus our eye on Ukraine, and we see no end to this conflict in sight. We just see it ramping up. We see more and more the bombs go further into Russia, and less Ukraine actually exists. In order for West to see any kind of resolution of the conflict, there has to be nothing but a complete and utter surrender of all Ukrainian land by the Russians. And I don't see this as even possible at this point. But I'm not going to pretend to know everything about the politics of that situation. I can only speak of it as an individual. I can only speak of it as somebody who, when put in that situation, am I going to fall back onto nationalism? Am I going to fall back onto patriotism? If I was Ukrainian, I'd want to stay and fight. But at some point, when there's no Ukraine left, what is the purpose to fight? If you're Ukrainian, do you fight for the interests of the West? As an average Ukrainian who's fighting in the ditches, I doubt very much that they have any interest in NATO's agenda. I doubt that they have any interest in who controls the vast supply of wheat, the vast supply of oil that's going to be ran through of gas that's going to be ran through there, because it's just lives. But then again, lives mean nothing in this conversation, in this landscape. Lives are worth nothing. It's just the resource, it's just the interest. We are grist for the wheel of profit. And as we see more and more desperation spill across the world, opportunity for conflict is only going to arise as people struggle and have to fight for the resources that they need to survive. And this isn't just something that's going to happen in Africa. This isn't something that's just going to happen in Asia, as historically we're used to happening. So it's not something that we generally care about, because it is just what it is, right? We look at the conflict that's always been going on in Africa. We look at starvation that's been going on in Africa, and we just say, well, this is Africa. This is just how it's always been there. But how thin can people draw their resources in the West when people can no longer afford housing, when people can no longer afford to feed their families? People often ask me, I'm good about complaining about things, but I don't give any solution. But this is a complicated thing, because there is no one simple solution to fix everything. People talk about stagflation, but stagflation is a symptom. What we're experiencing now are the consequences of 1,000 different actions. So there is no one solution. We have a massive bureaucratic system that supports a new aristocracy. And the devaluation of normal people's lives really give no incentive for anything above that bureaucratic structure to sponsor any change. And that's why I see, as far as the West goes, as far as America goes, that eventually there will be some kind of revolution. This isn't something that I think anybody wants. I don't think that any American wants to see a revolution, not a true revolution. An ideological revolution, yes, but an actual revolution is not something anyone should want to wish. We can romanticize the founding fathers. We can romanticize the Revolutionary War, the French Revolution. We can romanticize these things, but there was such a great cost in life. These were such great wars that they carved new nations onto the map. They ended bloodlines. They ended dynasties. whether real or trade, and the corporate technocratic aristocracy and the political pseudo-nobility that runs this country, they're not just going to give everything up. Now, thankfully, they're not as entrenched culturally. There's not the same ties to honor, ties to country that people have to support them. So I don't see Google, raising an army. I don't see Amazon raising an army. Even corrupt politicians on our system, you can't really see them raising an army against the people. And that's not what anyone wants. And I don't think that's what anybody in the higher ends of our country actually want. I don't think that's what anyone in the upper echelons of the Western governance actually want, because they know that's not how wars are fought anymore. They can gerrymander maps, they can gerrymander voting districts, they can use mass propaganda on people who reside on the bottom quartile of intelligence to get them to believe and support what they want, what they want them to believe and support. That's how wars are fought now. You look around you and I don't see warriors. That is not the world that we can be talking about when you're talking about solutions. And it's often said that this is a softer time. We are softer people. And this is reality. This isn't something to fight. We are a manifestation of our time. We are conditioned by the soft corners that society has given us. But eventually, as more hard times come, harder people will rise, and harder people will demand change. And harder people will demand change. Harder people will demand that their voices actually have effect, that they're not just screaming into the ether, because they want great things. They want the things that they saw their grandparents and their great-grandparents had. But that doesn't come without hard times, and I don't think that we've actually entered into real hard times yet. I think it can only get worse. It can only get worse because there's still room to squeeze profit out of. There's still room to pinch people, there's still weight that they can carry. But like I said, when it gets to the point that people can no longer carry the weight, people are going to drop that weight and either just disengage and disenfranchise from the system, or make moves to actually force change. Like I said, this is something that's down the road, and this is why, at this time now, the people, they're just not reacting to this kind of pressure, because there's still the hope and dream that things can turn around. And hopefully they can, but I just don't see it happening, because I feel like it doesn't matter who you vote into the system itself has its own will, has its own desires. And those desires have no consideration of the people that live under that bureaucratic class, that aristocratic class. So for now, we just have to be patient. We have to learn, we have to take care of ourselves, become more independent. Everyone needs to become more thrifty where they can, save what you can. Prepare yourself for hardship. Once you have money, I think it's a natural reaction for people once they have money to go out and kind of celebrate a paycheck, which is a sad thing when you celebrate a paycheck, because you should have enough money saved up that, being paid your average wage check isn't a celebration. But that's where I came from, and that's what I understand. Anytime you get a big paycheck, you get a big payday, time to celebrate. But I think that people need to look back to the people who survived the Great Depression, who began to stuff money into their mattresses, who began to no longer trust the banks, who honestly did divest from the system and move back to kind of a more traditional way of living, of being more self-sufficient, of not leaning on government powers, on government structures, but leaning on themselves, leaning on family. The West may not survive. America may not survive as it is now. I think that states will survive, but I think that the idea of the United States, I feel like that's, the more that I see the ideological differences grow wider and wider in this country, the less I believe that there is an actual future for the United States to exist. And I don't think that can be done peacefully. I don't think that the states disengaging from the federal contract that they have, I don't think that can be done peacefully at this point. I think that you're going to see calls for secession. I think that you're going to see this be more and more popular. We are already starting to hear it. Northern California, parts of Washington, even in Virginia, Northern Virginia and Southern Virginia. They want two different states. But I think that this is going to get more popular. I don't see that there's an easy way to do it, because I don't think that a power gives up power without a fight. But as time goes on, hopefully these parties, these groups, they lose the will to oppress as they see oppression actually take more of an effect on our society. But asking for empathy for those who see themselves as a kind of nobility has never worked throughout history. So until then, we can just be smart and be prepared and understand that in the future down the road, either in our lifetime or the next lifetime, things are more than likely going to get worse. But the family will survive. This is what I believe. The people will survive. And I think at the end, something new, whether it's the United States, whether it's these countries that we know and love, have a resurgence in a new golden age, which I really do hope. I love the West. I'm a child of the West. My ancestors belong to the West. I wanted to see the West thrive. I wanted to see it be the greatest, grandest culture on this planet, now and forever. But the reality is we're going through something very hard right now. And at the end of this, we're going to look very different. And change is always painful. Thanks for stopping by.